In the summer of 1976, 3 children were found living in a small underground room beneath what people in eastern Kentucky called the Fowler property. They had no records of any kind, no birth certificates, no medical history, no photos. When the state finally collected blood samples, the results came back with notes that were sealed for decades. The tests showed genetic details that did not match standard human data. The technician who handled the samples quit 2 days later and never spoke about it again. The children were separated, their files hidden under layers of paperwork, and the Fowler house was burned down by people who were never identified. This was not a rumor or a story people repeated for fun. It was a real case that someone tried to remove from public memory. The family who owned that property had lived in those mountains since before the Civil War. They avoided everyone and kept to themselves well beyond normal privacy. The closest town was Harlan, about 17 miles away on a road that turned to mud half the year. People there knew about the Fowlers, but they stayed away and never asked questions. In 1976, a social worker named Margaret Vance decided she needed to check on the rumors she had heard. People said there were children on that mountain who had never seen a doctor or gone to school. There were also strange reports about lights in the woods and sounds no one could explain. She drove up the mountain one morning in June. What she found stayed with her for the rest of her life. The road was so rough she had to stop her car and walk the last stretch through thick woods. In her later statement, she said the silence was the first thing she noticed. No birds, no insects, only her breathing and the sound of her steps. When she reached the clearing, she saw a house that looked like it had been added onto again and again without structure. The wood was old and rotting, and the windows were covered. There was a smell she could not identify. She called out with no answer. Then she called again, and this time she heard something coming from under the house. It sounded like children speaking in a language she did not know. She found the entrance behind the house, hidden under a weathered door. The space below went far deeper than a normal root cellar. At the bottom, lit only by a little light from cracks above, she found 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, maybe between 8 and 12, though no one could say for sure. Their skin was unusually pale, their veins visible. Their eyes reflected light more than normal. They did not cry or run. They just looked at her like they had expected someone to arrive. Their clothes looked handmade from old fabric. Their hair was cut very short, and she noticed markings on their scalps. Not scars, but symbols healed into the skin. Circles, lines, and patterns that looked almost like roots. She asked their names. The oldest girl made a soft sound that did not form a clear word. When she asked where their parents were, the boy pointed up at the house and then down at the ground. She called for backup. Within hours, the property was filled with local officers, state police, and 2 unidentified men who took control right away. The children were removed, wrapped in blankets, and taken to waiting vehicles. Meanwhile, the house was searched. It looked like no one had lived there for a long time. Dust covered everything, and the furniture was arranged in strange ways. In the kitchen area, shelves held rows of jars containing preserved organs from different animals. Some could be identified, others could not. A room in the back had its door nailed shut. Inside, the walls were covered in symbols matching the markings on the children. Drawings showed human-like figures with features slightly out of place. In the center was a table with worn leather straps that later tested positive for 3 different blood types, all matching the children. The men in suits photographed the room, then had it sealed. By morning, the photos were gone from evidence storage, and the officers who had first entered the room were told not to discuss what they saw. The children were taken to a facility in Lexington that did not appear in official records. They were separated into different wings and examined by doctors who had signed agreements to keep everything confidential. The medical reports did not make sense. The children's bones were too light for their size. Their body temperature stayed around 94 degrees. Their heart rates were unusually slow, yet they seemed fine. Their blood work showed details that the examining doctor said needed review by genetic specialists. Before those reviews happened, a lab technician named Patricia Gomez flagged the results. She had worked in genetics for more than a decade. When she tested their blood, she noticed patterns that did not match known human groups. The chromosome count was normal, but the details within the chromosomes were not. When she ran comparisons, the system could not place the children in any recognized human population. She thought it might be contamination or a mistake and ran the test again. The results stayed the same. She checked their maternal DNA, expecting normal patterns. Instead, the results suggested the children came from a lineage separated from other humans for thousands of years, far longer than anything known or recorded. Her supervisor made her repeat the tests while he watched. When the results matched again, he contacted people outside the university. Within hours, 2 men arrived, took all the samples and notes, and asked her who else knew. They told her the samples were part of a classified study, and that the irregular results were caused by contamination. She resigned 2 days later and never returned to genetics. After she passed away, her daughter found a paper in a safety deposit box. It listed 3 names with a note saying the children were not fully human, and that someone had known this before they were found. Within 72 hours of the flagged results, the children vanished from the Lexington facility without any official paperwork. Margaret Vance tried to follow up, but was told they had been placed with specialized foster families, and that she no longer needed to check on them. When she asked for more details, she was called into a meeting with her supervisor and 2 men who said they were from the Department of Health and Human Services. They thanked Margaret for her work and told her the children were safe. They also made it clear that if she kept pushing for information, it could be viewed as interfere with a federal case involving child protection. She had been in social services for nearly 20 years. She had seen many difficult cases, but she had never seen anything shut down with this much force. She stopped asking questions, but she kept a quiet file at home with copies of every document she managed to save before the case was sealed. The oldest girl, the one who made that soft humming sound when asked her name, was said to have been sent to a private facility in West Virginia. The paperwork described it vaguely as a place for long-term care for children with developmental and genetic issues. The building was isolated, fenced, and rarely inspected. Former workers who later spoke, without sharing their names, said it felt like a mix between a treatment center and a research site. The girl was given the name Sarah Fowler, though no one knows if Fowler was truly her family name or if it was given to her because of where she was found. Records show she stayed there until around 1983, when her file stops appearing. Nothing after that can be found. No public records, no identification activity, nothing at all. It is as if she completely disappeared. The boy and the younger girl were taken to separate places. One may have been sent to a center in upstate New York, the other possibly to the Pacific Northwest. The details are even less complete for them. Their assigned names appear only a few times in documents from the late 1970s and early 1980s, usually tied to continued medical monitoring. One heavily blacked-out document, released in 2012, mentions subjects 2 and 3 connected to the Kentucky relocation. It refers to continued tracking of their unusual genetic traits and their development in controlled settings. What can still be read mentions non-standard physical responses, trouble with language and social skills, and a line recommending they stay permanently separate from the general public. It also notes that the children reacted strongly when they saw each other, as if being apart affected them. The video narrator then addresses the audience, asking what someone would want to know or fear knowing if this were their family line. After the removal of the children and the burning of the house, investigators try to understand the Fowler family history. What they found was extremely unclear, with records that loop back on themselves. County documents from the 1800s showed the Fowlers holding on to the same land for generations, rarely interacting with nearby communities. Census takers often had trouble collecting information. One note from 1890 said the family was uncooperative and spoke in a strange way. The note also warned future census workers to bring help. Local churches had no record of the family. Instead, the Fowlers had their own burial ground near the trees on their property. Investigators found markers going back to the 1820s, most with only dates carved on rough stones. Some had symbols that matched the ones found on the children and on the walls of the back room. In 1978, 2 years after the children were found, archaeologists were allowed to survey the site. They discovered the burial area held far more graves than the number of markers. Ground scans suggested at least 40 burial sites, layered over many years. Plans to examine some of the remains were stopped by federal officials who said the fire had contaminated the soil. The cemetery was fenced off, and within a few years nature had reclaimed the area. Interviews with older residents of Harlan described the Fowlers as a family people had always kept their distance from. Some recalled Fowler men coming into town only when necessary, speaking little and paying with old coins or items they had gathered. People also talked about rarely seeing Fowler women, except as pale figures near the tree line. There were also older stories about missing children in the 1890s and hunters returning unsettled after wandering too close to the Fowler land, claiming they heard sound at night and saw lights in the woods. One elderly man interviewed in 1977 said his grandfather told him the Fowlers did not originally come from Kentucky. He said they moved from farther south, possibly the Carolinas or Georgia, after trouble that no one would explain. Attempt to follow the Fowler name through earlier records led to a family in North Carolina in the early 1800s linked to a conflict that caused several deaths and their sudden disappearance. Before that, there was no trace of them in any immigration or land documents. It was as if the Fowlers appeared in the Appalachian region around the early 19th century, kept to themselves, and guarded something in their bloodline they did not want mixed or revealed. The 3 children found in 1976, with their unusual DNA and the markings on their heads, seemed to be the final result of many generations of isolation. The case was officially sealed in 1977. Federal agencies classified all documents related to the investigation, medical reports, DNA results, and the children's placement. Margaret's reports were removed from state records. Local police files vanished from storage. Even photos of the property were taken by federal officials who said they would return them, but never did. The story given to the public was simple. 3 neglected children were found in poor conditions and placed in protective care. No mention of anything else. The land itself was taken by the government in 1978 and labeled protected wilderness. Roads leading to it have since grown over or been blocked. People who try to visit say the paths are gone and new gates block the way. Public satellite images show a dense forest with no signs of structures, though some parts of the imagery appear older or lower quality than surrounding areas. In 2006, a researcher named Daniel Morrow filed a request for all documents related to the case. His request was denied. He appealed and was denied again. He then filed a lawsuit claiming enough time had passed, but the case was dismissed on the grounds of medical privacy laws. He then tried tracing the children, now adults, but found no records for any of them. It was as though they had been removed from every system. Morrow died in 2011. His notes were donated to a university collection where they remain available, filled with redacted documents and unresolved questions. Some people believe the children are still alive in hidden facilities. Others think they may have passed away years ago. And others believe that whatever made the children different was not limited to the Fowler family, and that similar traits may exist in other remote families. The truth remains hidden behind layers of restrictions and missing records. Margaret Vance passed away in 2019. Her daughter tried to bring the saved file to journalists and researchers, but most people stepped back from it. The file still exists in a private collection. The Fowler property still sits somewhere in the woods of eastern Kentucky, overgrown, but still there. The graves remain. The cellar remains. And if the 3 children are still alive, they carry the truth of what happened and why. Whether anyone else is ready to know that truth is another question. What remains of the Fowler case sits at the edge of fact and silence. It is a story built from missing files, blocked requests, and the few people brave enough to ask why something so unusual was buried so fast. The adults who lived near that mountain are gone now. The officers who walked through the house are retired or no longer here. The scientists who handled the tests are remembered only through scattered notes and the questions they left behind. What has survived is the sense that something important happened in those woods, something that never received a full explanation. The empty land where the Fowler house once stood is quiet today. The official maps call it protected wilderness. The old road that once led to clearing is now covered in trees and brush. Anyone trying to reach the site will find fences, warning signs, and a landscape that has been left untouched for so long it has swallowed every trace of what came before. It is almost as if the land itself has been told to hide what happened. We are left with 3 missing lives, 3 children discovered under impossible conditions, taken by people who offered no answers, and removed from every record that should have kept them safe. If they are still living somewhere, they are in their late 40s now. They would know more about their past than anyone else. They would know what they saw in that cellar. They would know what was done to them before Margaret arrived. They would know why someone made sure the rest of the world never learned the full truth. But their voices have never been heard. Their names have never reappeared. Their history exists only in sealed files and secondhand memories. Even now, decades later, the question remains the same. Why would a case involving 3 neglected children be handled with this level of secrecy? Why take their files, their DNA results, and every document connected to them, only to hide it all behind national security rules? The answer may still be out there, buried under trees, or locked away in a building most people will never see. The Fowler story is not closed. It is unfinished. And as long as the truth stays hidden, people will keep searching for it, hoping that one day, someone will step forward with the missing pieces and finally explain what was found in that cellar in the summer of 1976.